guys, I need to get a webcam and put it right in the middle so you guys don't have to watch me start off a stream with my head turned to the left because I have to turn my head to mute my stream. They haven't started yet. We could have watched some more Phil Spector. I didn't know. Probably should have checked. I swear, guys, I will get better. I promise. Practice makes perfect, right? Where is it? As in, where is it taking place? Come on, StreamYard. I just want to put the comment on the dang screen. It is in. It's in Massachusetts. Um. It happened. Come on. All right, StreamYard. StreamYard's like, Debbie, you're doing too many things at once. I can't handle it all. It's in Massachusetts. It happened in Canton, Massachusetts. And the trial's in Dedham. And I don't know if that's because that's where the courthouse is or if they moved it. It's probably because that's where the courthouse is, because from what I understand, Canton's a very small town. I was so disappointed that you missed it because I had you in mind when I planned it. And I hope I did a good job. I only got confused once and said the wrong thing about a person. There's just so many people in that trial. Participants, players, whatever you want to call them. And somebody was like, they need to stop having kids. Yeah, they do. There's too many. They're the McCabe's and the Alberts, and everybody now just that watches the trial calls them the McAlberts because it's easier that way. I cannot imagine having. Well, I guess I did have that kind of a family because, like, I have kissing cousins like that. Like, I have cousins that aren't really my cousins, they're my cousin's cousins. You know what I mean? Like, they're family, but they're not family. Like, I see them at family gatherings, but they're not blood family, they're family by marriage. Like, I have like my aunt that married my husband and me, she's not my aunt, she's my cousin's aunt. And I always call her Aunt Linda. I've called her Aunt Linda since the day I met her. Like, I didn't know her growing up. I met her. She was part of the community theater that I was in. And when she heard my last name, she goes, "Are you related to Leslie and Christy?" And I was like, "Yeah, they're my cousins." And she's like, "Oh, I'm their aunt." And I was like, "What? How are you my cousin's aunt?" I was in like my early 20s. And she's like, "Yeah, I'm their aunt." My husband is their mother's brother. And I was like, oh. And I've just called her Aunt Linda ever since. And then she performed our wedding, and she's family now, even though not by blood. And that's small towns. And then, um, yeah, it's small towns are, and, um, I had a nursing assistant at the nursing home whose last name was Rogers. And um, I said, one night she was sitting there. I noticed her name. She was new. I noticed her name tag said Rogers, and I said, "Who are you?" Hey, Rodney. I said, "Who are you related to?" And she said, "Why? Who do you know?" And I said, "Roy Rogers is my uncle. He's he was married to my dad's sister." So I said, "Roy Rogers is my uncle." And she said, "Oh, I'm married to Mike." And Mike was my uncle's nephew. And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." So I consider Mike my cousin, even though he's not my cousin. He was my uncle's nephew. So, like, but see, a lot of my family has passed on. But yeah, I used to have a family, and they would all come to family gatherings, and we all knew everybody. So I guess I shouldn't say that it's awkward to have family like that, or I can't imagine having family like that, because I did when I was younger, when everybody was still alive. I did. I just, you don't think about it when you, but now stopping to think about it, yeah, our family was as crazy with people, just like the McAlberts. Hey, Terry. And then I can remember people, like, back when I was younger, there were other people that I barely remember that were related in some way. There was this one girl named Libby. I don't remember how she was related to us, but my cousins, because I didn't live here, we lived in South Florida, and everybody else was up here. And we would visit like a couple times a year before we moved up here. And there was a girl named Libby that was related to one of my cousins somehow. And do you remember that commercial? Isn't there like a Libby's Vegetables or something? And the commercial went something like, "We want Libby's, Libby's, Libby's on our table, table, table." You guys remember that commercial? And they used to tease her and sing that commercial at her. And that's why I remember this girl, but I don't remember how we were related. And I've never seen her as an adult, so I don't know what happened to her. I just know that we were related to her somehow. Oh, thank you, Carla. And then I have, um, Jean. His last name's Rogers. His name's Jean Rogers. Mm, don't do that. Carla, thank you so much. Mhm. Hey, Billy Jean. Okay, you have to have gifting turned on, and I don't remember how to do that. I think if it used to be if you right click or click. Wow, Terry, thank you. Thought if you click on the last person that enable gifts would pop up, but I don't think it does that anymore. I don't remember how to do it. My friend Allison got one, and I have not had a chance to tell her that I have Windows on. So maybe she'll show up and go, "What? What is happening?" She's the one that got me into doing this. She's got a YouTube channel, and right after I don't know if it's after or still during the Johnny Depp trial, and basically was talking about remember when um, her took the tissue and went like up her face with it, and we were like, "That's not how that works." I'm not doing. You keep telling me page unresponsive. I'm not trying to do anything.
Good morning, everyone.
All I did was unplug my microphone and plug it back in. That's all I did. That's all I did. I swear. Can you guys hear me okay now? Sometimes I think I just look at the screen wrong and it gets StreamYard mad at me and it just shuts down. StreamYard hates me very much. Don't know why. I've never done anything to it. I've behaved. I've been a good girl. I don't know why it hates me so much. I was going to do some research on that over the weekend. I was also going to do my taxes over the weekend. Guess what I didn't do over the weekend?
I can, Your Honor, yes.
All right, and we can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect.
Ms. Thompson, was there anything we needed to address before beginning with the witness?
I don't believe so, Your Honor.
Okay, let's see if I can find my camera and I'll swear the witness in here. 1 second. Too many screens to keep track of here. All right, good morning. If you'd raise your hand, sir, I'll swear you in. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give will be true and correct?
I do.
Okay, whenever you're ready, Ms. Thompson.
Thank you, Your Honor. And Mr. Safrick, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes. Hold on 1 second. Let me just turn this up a little bit. Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Safrick. Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
Sure. My name is Mark Safrick. I am the president of Forensic Behavioral Services.
And what do you do for a living as the president of that company?
I conduct complex assessments of death investigations, death cases for interested parties to help them understand what happened, how those events within the case unfolded, and possibly sometimes why.
Are you familiar with the term equivocal death evaluation, Mr. Safrick?
Yes.
Can you tell?
Recording in progress.
Can you tell the court, Mr. Safrick, what an equivocal death evaluation is?
Sure. An equivocal death evaluation is an investigation where the manner of death, not necessarily the cause of death, but the manner of death is in dispute or in question, or where there are several possible scenarios that could explain the death.
And I want to get back to that concept with you, Mr. Safrick. But for starters, did you work in law enforcement prior to starting your company?
I did.
And can you tell us in general terms what your law enforcement career consisted of?
Sure. I started in 1977 in California with a local law enforcement city police agency. I started in patrol. I worked about 3.5 years in patrol and then promoted into detectives, started in property crimes, and finished out my time there in violent crime investigation. Subsequent to that, I applied to the FBI. I got into the FBI in 1984. I served in various field offices. I served 23 years in the FBI, the last 12 plus years in the behavioral analysis unit.
In total, how long was your law enforcement career?
30 years.
And in total, how many of those years were with the FBI?
23.
And you mentioned that you worked with the behavioral analysis unit in the FBI. Can you tell me what you did in that unit?
Sure. So I worked there were 3 units. We had a child crimes unit, we had a threat assessment terrorism unit, and we had an adult crimes unit. So I was assigned to the adult crimes unit. I was responsible for, it's a relatively small unit. We had 8 criminal behavioral analysts. I was responsible for the 6 western states of the country, for all cases that came in from law enforcement agencies from those locations. Most of the cases that I worked on were homicide cases, multicide, so serial murder, mass murder, spree murder, sexual homicide cases, and serial sexual assaults, all related to adults.
Did part of your work in that unit involve analyzing crime scenes?
Essentially, everything, despite the services that we offered, everything within the unit requires a detailed analysis of the crime scene in whatever case it is and whatever we're being asked to provide to the requesting law enforcement agency. So it all comes down to conducting a detailed analysis of the scene, the antecedent behavior, the behavior during the scene, evaluating forensic evidence, physical evidence, and integrating all of that information together to understand the totality of the events that are occurring both in sequence and in time.
You told us earlier about this concept of equivocal death evaluations. Did you perform those evaluations while you were with the FBI?
I did.
And did you have experience at the FBI investigating cases where investigators initially believed the case was a homicide, but the case turned out to be something else?
Yes.
Have you published in the area of death investigations?
Yes, I've published, I have a book on spree murders for police investigations. I have numerous peer-reviewed international journal articles on various aspects of death analysis and investigation.
Have you trained law enforcement officers on the topic of death investigations?
Yes.
Can you tell us briefly about your experience training other officers on this subject?
So I regularly do presentations for law enforcement groups and other groups for forensic nurses, victim advocates. I've presented to judges, to prosecutors, to defense attorneys, homicide investigators, violent crime investigators around the U.S. and throughout the world. I would say, conservatively, I would say I've presented to over 20,000 law enforcement professionals.
Are you the member of any professional organizations?
Yes, there's a number of them that I have listed in my CV. American Academy of Forensic Sciences, the VDOC Society, it's a cold case society. Off the top of my head, I have a list that I just don't recall them now.
In your consulting career since you left the FBI, what kinds of clients have you consulted for?
Well, since I left the FBI, Most of the clients are, I would say, attorneys, civil attorneys. So the types of cases that I work on typically involve some type of violent crime. But I have done cases for prosecutors, for defense attorneys, and even for private parties. Sometimes family members will retain me to examine a case. And so yeah, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and then in civil cases, both the plaintiff and the defense.
Do you have clients for whom you've consulted where the client ended up not using the opinions that you provided to them?
Yes, that occurred both in the FBI when we consulted with law enforcement agencies, and also civilly. You know, the cases that I've done in the nearly 18 years since I've been retired from the FBI, there will always be cases where the analysis doesn't line up with what the attorneys are looking for, and then they don't end up using me.
I want to come back to this topic of equivocal death evaluation and crime scene analysis. And for starters, Mr. Safrick, you are not a medical doctor, is that right?
That's correct.
In reaching your opinions about crime scene analysis and case investigation, do you rely on medical diagnoses that are reached by medical professionals in those cases?
I do.
And do you also rely on objective evidence that's gathered by law enforcement investigators and others related to a case?
Of course.
Mr. Safrick, are you here today to offer any opinions on whether any particular person related to the investigation into Ms. Mullis's death is telling the truth?
No.
Are you here today to offer any medical opinions?
No.
And the opinions that you're going to offer today, are those opinions that you hold to a reasonable degree of certainty?
They are.
You talked about this concept of equivocal death evaluation. How does an equivocal death evaluation differ from another type of homicide investigation?
So most of the cases that I've worked on, both in my FBI career and subsequently, typically involve a violent crime, oftentimes a homicide. So the advantage when you are working a case like that is that you know at the outset that the manner of death is homicide. So that's never in question. When you're working an equivocal death case, they actually are much more difficult to work because when you get the case, the manner of death is either in dispute or it's unknown. It could be undetermined, which is one of the five evaluations that you can have in the United States for manner of death. So the way that you approach an equivocal death is different than you would approach, say, a homicide case. Here, you have to look at all of the various attributes of the case in terms of what is consistent and what's inconsistent with a particular manner of death. Now, I would say that in most of the equivocal death cases that I have worked, when you look at the four manners of death, which would be natural, accident, suicide, and homicide, in most of the cases, you can eliminate usually one or two of the four. So you're usually left with two manners of death that you have to consider. So it's a more complex type of investigation because you have to consider various avenues of consistency and inconsistency with the forensic evidence, the physical evidence, and the behavioral actions that have occurred at the scene, and how all of those translate both sequentially and in a time order or temporally.
Mr. Safrick, did you conduct an equivocal death evaluation into Ms. Mullis's death?
I did.
And did you review evidence related to the investigation into her death as part of your evaluation?
Absolutely.
Can you tell us in general terms what you reviewed?
So, what is important in literally any type of investigation is the initial police investigation. So that would be any investigation they did, any evidence that was collected, any testing of that evidence. In a death case, it would be the autopsy protocol, photographs and diagrams from the scene, any interviews of witnesses, the assessment of the scene itself. That is all the critical information. Typically, in those types of investigations, what occurs weeks or months later oftentimes isn't really relevant to what I'm doing, because I'm doing a crime scene analysis. So it's everything that's attendant to the initial scene, which is typically frozen by police on their arrival.
And I do want to start talking, I want to start by asking you some questions about the scene that you just referenced. Based on your evaluation that you conducted in this case, did you develop opinions about the scene of Ms. Mullis's death?
Yes.
And are you aware that in this case, prosecutors argued to the jury that the scene of Ms. Mullis's death was staged?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
All right. So when we talk about the concept of the scene in the Mullis investigation, what do you understand to be the scene of where she was injured?
Well, okay, so I would say more broadly, the scene is literally the entire farm area of the Mullis farm. If we're referring just to the injury location, that would be the shed that stands between the house and the hog barns.
Is it your understanding in this case that Ms. Mullis died at the hospital?
Yes.
And why do you consider the scene to be the shed and the Mullis farm in this case?
Well, okay, so I would say I would consider the Mullis farm, or at least certainly the area around the house and the shed and the workshop and the hog barns, as the overall scene area, because there were witnesses and individuals in those locations. I would say that the shed is the location for Miss Mullis's passing, because there's physical evidence in the shed that suggests that. The interviews that were conducted, the information derived from those interviews indicates that. And the police investigation and their theory is that her death took place in the shed.
In your training,
which I think is accurate.
And when you're talking,
her injury took place in the shed.
In your training and experience, what does it mean for a scene to be staged?
So staging a crime scene is an attempt by the offender of, say, the homicide, because that's typically where you see staged crime scenes, is in homicides. It's an attempt by the offender to misdirect the investigation. And the way that they misdirect the investigation is to introduce either spurious or fake evidence, remove evidence, or create contrived activities or behaviors that actually didn't occur. And the idea is that the purpose is that they're trying to create a new scene that has a new motive, because that's what they want law enforcement investigators to look at and draw their own conclusion that this is what is actually occurring as opposed to what actually occurred. And so they stage the scene. The reason that staging has some relationship with the victim or the scene or both of those.
So how is it that law enforcement evaluate whether or not a scene is staged?
Well, that's the point. So the offender, he manipulates scene, either the forensic evidence or the behavioral evidence, or the physical evidence. They manipulate the scene to change it so that when law enforcement comes and looks at the scene, that they're trying to overwhelm what law enforcement's logical conclusion about the scene would be, to make them think it's actually something different. So a new type of case that has a different motive. The problem is that when you are staging a crime scene, all of this activity then is happening after the crime. So it's not occurring in the right sequence or the right time order. And so you get inconsistent forensics, you get inconsistent injuries, you may have blood spatter in a location that doesn't fit the crime. So there are a lot of red flags that are evident in staged crime scenes.
Did you see evidence in this case that the scene of Ms. Mullis's injuries was staged in some way?
No.
And can you explain how you reached that determination?
Well, I would say first off, when you stage a crime scene, the point is that you need law enforcement investigators to come to the scene and look at it. You've changed the scene, you've changed the victim, you've changed evidence, you've created something that is supposed to look different, but you need investigators to see it because you need for them to draw their own conclusions about the scene. Incorrect conclusions, but that's the whole point. So here you don't even have a scene, and that's the point. So there's no staging that's going on here because investigators, they only come to the shed at a later time.
So why was there no scene in this case?
I'm sorry?
I said, why is it that there was no scene in this case, as you just mentioned?
Right. So there's no scene because, first of all, Amy Mullis is not deceased. And there's an attempt to render aid to her, both in the shed, in the truck, and then subsequently where there's civic, not everything is, suggests that Mr. Mullis was attempting to render aid to his wife in getting to the hospital. So there's no scene to analyze, not for staging anyway.
In your experience, is an aspect of scene staging sometimes that a person that is staging a scene will generate a situation where someone else will find the victim?
Yes, that's very common, and not even in staged scenes, but in other types of homicide cases where it's called, what we refer to it as third-party discovery. So what they don't want is to discover the victim, because then it creates a problem for them because they're not at an arm's length distance. So oftentimes they will have somebody else discover the victim. That could be a neighbor, it could be a coworker, it could be a friend. That puts them at arm's length from both the scene and the victim, and essentially allows them to try to create an alibi.
Well, here you're aware that it was not Mr. Mullis that found Miss Mullis, is that right?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
And
yes.
in your evaluation of this case, did the circumstances of this case fit the third-party discovery dynamic that you just described?
I would say no for two reasons. One, in every third-party discovery, in any case I've ever worked, or any case that I'm aware of from my time in the FBI's behavioral unit, or in my 18 years subsequent to that, I have never seen a third-party discovery where a parent sends a child to make the discovery. It's typically an adult contacting another adult, not a family member, but, as I said, neighbor, friend, coworker, somebody disconnected personally, in a sense, from the victim. So that's not my experience to have sent. I've never seen you send a minor child to find, the parent. Secondly, it doesn't really work here because there's nobody here at the Mullis farm. This farm is isolated. It's out in the country. There are no houses around it. There were no other people. So it doesn't make any sense to send, if you're trying to do third-party discovery, it doesn't make any sense to send your minor child to make the discovery. For one, there's nobody else around, and two, the time frame is literally minutes. So we're not talking about hours or days. We're just talking minutes. So it wouldn't serve any purpose in terms of distancing yourself from the scene to send your minor child.
Did you see evidence in this case that Tristan Mullis was interviewed by authorities, soon after the events that brought Miss Mullis to the hospital?
Yes, he was interviewed within minutes after the event.
Did his availability for interviews influence your conclusion that there's not evidence of third-party staging here?
Yes, partially. It's one of the things that I would say is consistent with it. Because he's a minor, you have to have parental permission to interview a minor. And Todd gave permission immediately for Tristan to accompany law enforcement back to the house to show them and tell them what he saw, what he did, what he found. And so that's inconsistent, really, because if you're the offender, you don't want a third party to be making statements that might affect your credibility or whatever you've told law enforcement.
And did you see evidence in this case of Mr. Mullis interrupting or being law enforcement from Tristan without Mr. Mullis?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this line of questioning as improper expert opinion testimony because it's a comment on credibility not only of Todd Mullis but also of Tristan Mullis' case. Credibility determination solely from the fact finder, and it is not subject to expert testimony 703.
I didn't hear an answer. You may.
No. Yeah. Can you just repeat?
So we'll give her a chance to do that.
Thank you.
And did you see evidence in this case of Mr. Mullis interrupting or preventing law enforcement from interviewing Tristan without Mr. Mullis there?
No, there were two instances. Law enforcement asked Mr. Mullis if they could interview Tristan. One of them was immediately after, from the roadside location to accompany Tristan back to the house to explain the whole situation there. And then later on that day, they also asked him again, and he said, sure, go ahead.
Did that permission impact your conclusions here about the scene not being staged?
I think, as I said, I think it's one piece, right? Because, especially with a minor child, it would be very easy to say, I don't want you to talk to him or want him with, for whatever reason. I think it lends itself to suggest care and told Tristan's experience was.
You see, and equivocal diagnosis case was planning involved in some way causing Miss Mullis's death.
Right. So, I don't see any staging in this case. And, I don't see any planning. If the allegation is that it's staged, I think if it's planned, it would be very, very poorly planned. Force is really a terrible weapon. Can it inflict fatal injuries? Yes. But is it a good weapon to use? No. If you're planning this, you don't want your children around. You don't want to be in a position where you literally would have to escape from your son to commit this. And also, you have two other minor children in the house, a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old. You have no control over them. You don't know where they're going to be, if they're going to come outside, if they're going to go to the shed. That they played in the shed. So it would be extremely risky. So to do that with your minor children would be, problematic. Accidents are very prevalent. So if you're going to plan this, if you've spent time to think this, then there are lots of other ways that this could have occurred that didn't involve in your minor children and didn't involve a very odd type of weapon like a corn rake. And it would have given you the privacy to interact with Amy at another location, somewhere off the farm property. But I just didn't see any evidence of planning, because I don't think there's no staging here. And if this is planned, it's extremely poorly planned.
Did the fact that Miss Mullis passed away at the hospital in this case, is that a fact that you took into account in evaluating whether or not there was planning associated with her death?
Yes, because the idea in a staged crime scene, one, is that the victim is deceased, because you're going to be manipulating the scene, manipulating the victim. So the victim has to be deceased, because if they're not deceased, then there's a possibility they can't move away, get help, render the aid to themselves. It becomes very problematic. So the fact that she's not deceased, again, in terms of planning, if this was the plan to kill her, then, that didn't succeed.
If Miss Mullis was, if there was evidence in this case that Miss Mullis was the person who suggested the family work in the barn the day of her injuries, would that contribute to your analysis of whether?
I have thoughts. At the risk of crashing again, I have thoughts. You don't, if you do something to somebody and they're not gone, you're going to leave them where they are if that's your intent. They took her to the hospital. So you have to assume, if he did this on purpose, that he didn't know that Tristan would find her. So you would expect him, if he had planned this, you would expect him to have done it at a time where Tristan wasn't likely to find her, right? Because of course your kid is going to say, "Mom's hurt, we got to take her to the hospital." So I can see why this guy is saying poor planning. Although, I did just type that in the chat. But this seems like it would be extremely poorly planned, because the son is right there and can find mom and say, "Let's take her to the hospital." So I see the line of logic that this guy's going with about why it's poorly planned.
And in some way.
Yes, I mean, it affects it because because of her medical procedure, she had been unsteady, dizzy. She'd been resting at the house for several days. So it was, I believe, only on that morning when she informed Todd that she just couldn't sit in that house anymore and was going to come out and try to help in the barn. So again, how would you know this? I mean, you really wouldn't know it. So it goes against planning. Additionally, in terms of the planning, if you're trying to stage this, so then you have to know where the corn rake is, right? You have to be able to tell police, yeah, I saw the corn rake there yesterday. I was in the shed yesterday. I saw the corn rake. It was right here. So because it has to be, the scenario would have to make sense, right? You're trying to make it make sense to the police. So yes, you're going to tell the investigators, yes, the corn rake was in the shed. I saw it in the shed. Yeah, this is where I saw it, right? But that's not what you have here. Instead, when they asked Todd where the corn rake was, he's like, I don't know. I hadn't seen it for 2 weeks. Last time I saw it weeks ago, I'd set it against the wall, but I don't know where it was. So that doesn't make any sense if you're trying to stage a crime scene, right? You're trying to make law enforcement believe that this is, an accident, right? That's what you're trying. So you need to have the corn rake there, to confirm that for them, but it's not. And I don't think Todd knew until that morning that Amy was planning on coming out to the hog barns.
Is the topic of victimology relevant to equivocal death evaluations?
Yes, victimology is relevant to any type of crime analysis because understanding the individual whose life is taken or who dies, is really important to understand their background, and what effect that has on risk level for them. So understanding that background, all aspects of that background from their various types of histories, could be criminal or psychological or financial, their relationship dynamics with friends, coworkers, family members, all of that information is important to understand, who is Amy Mullis and, what's that dynamic relationship between her, Todd, other people in her life.
Is that what that term victimology means, what you just described?
Yes, right. And it also, especially when you're talking about risk, you're trying to assess at what level of risk is she to become the victim of a violent crime. But on the flip side, you're also, that also informs the level of risk that an offender is willing to take to commit the crime. So if you have a very, very low risk victim, which I would say Amy is, not only because of her lifestyle, but simply because she lives in a very isolated location that's difficult to really find or get access to her. But also, sorry, lost my train of thought. Also because, the risk would be very high for an offender to access her there. So risk is a balance between the victim and the willingness for the offender to take on, more risk. And the more risk an offender is willing to take, then the more important it is for them to, commit whatever act they're, preparing to commit.
Well, in considering victimology and in considering risk, in general, in conducting these type of equivocal death evaluations, do you consider the concept of infidelity in making that analysis?
Sure, if that exists, if it's relevant. So there are lots of different components to victimology, and their relationship dynamics the relationship dynamics in her relationships would be important. So if it's uncovered that there's marital infidelity, certainly that would be important to understand.
Well, in conducting this equivocal death evaluation, did you consider the issue of infidelity in the Mullis marriage in reaching your conclusions?
Sure, absolutely.
And how did that fit into your analysis?
Well, so once I was aware of it, then I have to put it in context, right? So everything that's done in my type of analysis is always within context. It's always within the totality of the circumstances. It's never a single piece of evidence that, is pulled out and assigned a value. It only has meaning within the context of everything you're looking at. So when I became aware that she had this affair with Mr. Frazier, then I wanted to take that into consideration. What do I know about that? Who knows about that? Did Todd know about that? What's that dynamic? What is that dynamic like? So, of course, is a very important piece.
And did you draw any conclusions about how, if at all, infidelity would have played a role in the victimology in this case?
So one thing I really wanted to understand is, was Todd aware of it? Now, clearly, there had been a past infidelity that he was aware of. But in this current one, based on the emails and the texts between Amy, Jerry Frazier, Mr. Frazier's wife, several of her friends whom she confided this infidelity to, there's nothing that I was able to see that led me to believe that Todd was aware of the infidelity. I mean, Amy said he wasn't. Jerry said he wasn't. In fact, there was a questioning by Todd in, I believe it was July of 2018, where he had seen a number of texts between Amy and Jerry, and asked Jerry about them. Or I think asked Jerry about them, and was given what appeared to be a reasonable explanation for it, and then spoke to Amy, and to the extent that I think he felt badly that he had thought there could be something going on, and actually apologized to Jerry and to Jerry's wife. And in texts between Jerry and Amy, they were very confident that Todd was not aware of the affair.
In considering the issue of victimology, in assessing risk factors as you've described, do you as an investigator think through the dynamic of someone reporting events differently to different people?
Sure, absolutely.
And did you consider that dynamic in this case?
Of course.
And what, if any, oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Safrick.
Well, so certainly, I mean, all of us have different relationship dynamics with people. We have our public lives, we have our private lives, and some people have a secret life. But it depends on the relationship dynamic with your friends. So some of your friends are more distant. They're almost more like acquaintances, and other friends are people you see all the time, and then other friends are like really close friends. That could be the same for coworkers. So when the stories and the conversations that you have with different people in your life basically reflect the level of comfort you have with them, what you will tell them. And so you see, I mean, when you look at the conversations that she has with several of her friends and with Jerry, you can see the difference in the conversations, and that I think would be expected.
This is
Do you need power?
Yeah.
There's a power strip right in front if you can reach.
He's cute. He smiles.
Yeah, and I had him check it.
I did get an answer to the last question, right? I don't need it read back. I just want to make sure. Okay, thank you. Did you see evidence in your evaluation, Mr. Staffrick, that there were communications between Ms. Mullis and Jerry Frazier, where Ms. Mullis was critical of Todd Mullis?
Yes.
And what, if any, conclusions did you draw from those communications in terms of Ms. Mullis's victimology?
I didn't think that there was anything wrong with those. You know, she has this secret affair going on with Mr. Frazier. I mean, she's violating her marital vows. She's, there's probably some level of fantasy, that's going on here. So I think based on the conversation she was having with Jerry, at some point, she feels badly and she's looking for someone to sort of buoy her up, right? Support her, almost, I don't want to say like a victim mentality, but certainly, that kind of, where it's, she's looking for sympathy. She's looking for someone to, provide support for her, right? To make her feel good. I think those kinds of texts with Jerry, if you're commenting on your relationship with Todd, I think it, makes sense, when you're talking to somebody who's, your secret lover. I didn't see anything that, that caused me any kind of, concern.
Did you see any differences in the communication between information that Ms. Mullis was conveying to Mr. Frazier and information that she was conveying to Todd?
Sure. I mean, I think, she's married to Todd. She has children with Todd, right? They have a business together. So some of the texts that she's sending Todd are very playful, loving, discussing things that I think any normal couple would be discussing, things happening on the farm, breakfast, just sort of innocuous kinds of conversations. She did say that she loved him, but of course she's got this secret side of her. So obviously she's not going to tell Todd about that, but it doesn't mean that she doesn't care about Todd. And I mean, that's the sense I got in reading a number of messages. And you can't just read one. You have to put them in context. You have to read a lot of those, and a lot of those messages to her friends, and evaluate, what is that relationship? What is she comfortable telling these different people?
And Your Honor, again, I'm going to object on well beyond the scope of expert testimony. We're just commenting on text messages and things that are well within common sense and not subject as a reliable expert opinion of 702 and 03, and therefore should be excluded under even 403B.
I mean, I do think we're getting pretty far afield here, Ms. Thompson. If you want to try to tie this back in, that's okay, but I'm not sure what your next question is.
I mean, I'm moving forward, Your Honor. I would just say that there was some testimony from Mr. Firehelm that he personally, in his analysis of the case, believed that there were and I don't remember his exact words from yesterday, but that basically his own evaluation of the marriage was different than what Mr. Safrick's describing. And one of the ineffective assistance of counsel claims that Mr. Mullis has is that his counsel didn't consult with someone who could have provided context. So this is relevant to Mr. Mullis's ineffective assistance of counsel claim. I agree that, and it's not this witness's intention or our intention to argue that this witness can provide, veracity about these issues, but more context for counsel to have evaluated the issues here and how to present them for Mr. Mullis.
Your Honor, if I may be heard.
You may.
Well, that's certainly not what he authored the report for, to comment on Mr. Firehelm's testimony. He makes direct credibility determinations, and he coins it under a term victimology. There's at least 2 cases which have excluded his analysis specifically on this point and reversed for new trials as it being inadmissible in the first place and therefore unreliable. I'm happy to provide those citations now. They're from the Illinois Supreme Court, where they find the entirety of this testimony in line of questioning to be inadmissible, as did the New Jersey court that they relied on too, because it's the equivalent of testimony from a 13th juror to parrot in a theory of a case. That is improper testimony, and we would vehemently object under the expert testimony provisions in 403.
Yeah. And certainly little different to have the testimony of trial counsel's analysis of the case and attempting to get the testimony in this way through an expert. So again, if you can have him explain how he's qualified as an expert to talk to me about this specific type of testimony in a way that isn't vouching or credibility, which is my domain, I guess we can try to go there. But the way this direction is, or the way this testimony is going, seems to be down that path at the moment. So let's maybe redirect and get back into something that I think is his domain with investigations or the way in which he handles them, please.
Understood, Your Honor. And we can take up the issue of that case law because we disagree with what it says, but I understand the court's ruling, and I'll move on to a different topic.
Thank you.
Mr. Safrick, are you familiar with the concept of confirmation bias?
Yes.
And can you tell us in brief terms what that is?
Well, I would say in reference to like a criminal case, the investigators are more likely to search for and recognize what confirms their bias or their theory and ignore or not consider evidence to the contrary.
Do you see evidence of confirmation bias in the investigation?
And Your Honor, this is psychological evidence. Psychologist, he has no medical experience as a psychiatrist. What is the point of this testimony? Again, under our reading of the case law, courts have kept out the very same thing and found it to be improper, and we would object on those grounds as before. It's the same grounds as before.
Did you wish to respond to this, Ms. Thompson?
Well, the case law that the primary case in Illinois in which a court determined Mr. Safrick's opinions were not relevant actually dealt with his assessment of a crime scene. If the state is referencing People versus King, we can talk about that case. This is not testimony that's offered to provide the purpose of this testimony is to talk about what this investigation was and why it is that both Mr. Mullis's own attorneys and investigators focused on incorrect information. And that is within Mr. Safrick's province as an experienced FBI investigator, as an experienced law enforcement officer who evaluates these cases. It's to understand why both Mr. Mullis's own attorneys and the authorities would have focused on particular issues without looking at others. And that's relevant to understanding why it is that Mr. Mullis didn't receive effective assistance of counsel and why it is that this investigation got off track, which again is one of the claims that Mr. Mullis raises in his petition.
And again, Your Honor, if I may, Mr. Safrick's report doesn't speak to that. The ultimate conclusion as set out on page 56 and 57 is meant for him to speak to whether or not this was an accident or a homicide. Specifically, if we look to his conclusion. He said, quote, "I was asked to review this case to determine if a manner of death other than homicide would provide the most logical explanation for Amy's death," close quote. I believe that's at page 57, Your Honor, possibly 58. And so Mr. Safrick's conclusions certainly aren't being relevant to an ineffective assistance of counsel claim. And again, improper testimony invades on the fact finder's function here.
Ms. Thompson, any further response?
I mean, Mr. Safrick has not offered an opinion about the cause of death here, although he certainly has one, as the state alluded to. There's nothing about, and his report dozens are just as relevant for what counsel would have taken into account in choosing whether or not to investigate, choosing whether or not to make certain arguments on Mr. Mullis's behalf. I mean, that is exactly the purpose of his report. It's information that counsel could have taken into account. That's exactly what we offered it for in our petition, that counsel failed to get this kind of expert opinion, which would have aided in counsel's analysis. There is nothing about Mr. Safrick's report that is inconsistent with presenting it in that way. We have not presented Mr. Safrick's ultimate opinion in this case. That is the province of the court. But these are all the factors that he could have explained to counsel, which would have helped counsel understand what evidence would have been relevant to arguing this case to the jury in Mr. Mullis's case. And I'd say that there's a number of other cases where Mr. Safrick's analysis and opinions have been accepted by courts, and we have a number of those cases we can cite to the court. So the state has pulled out, a couple where courts went the other way, but that's not Mr. Safrick has testified all over the country, and his opinions have been accepted by courts in numerous states.
To the extent that the court understands Mr. Safrick to be offering an opinion as to the investigation that was conducted into this matter, and not an opinion or as an expert on confirmation bias specifically, the court will allow the testimony and give it whatever weight it's ultimately due. So the objection's overruled. You may proceed, Ms. Thompson.
I'm sorry, what was my last question? And I apologize because I don't recall. I believe the last question may have been.
Do you see evidence of confirmation bias in the investigation against Mullis's death?
Did you hear that question, Mr. Safrick?
Oh, I didn't. No, I did not.
Let me repeat it. Did you, Mr. Safrick, see evidence of confirmation bias in the Mullis investigation?
Yes.
And can you explain what evidence you saw of that?
Well, I think the first really important piece here relates to the interviews that were done of Tristan and Todd. It's important to understand that the first three interviews of Todd, two of them occurred. The first three occurred on the day, on the 10th. The first three interviews of Tristan, or first two interviews of Tristan, also occurred on the 10th. At no time were those interviews conducted with Todd and Tristan together. They were all conducted independently. In fact, all of the interviews that were conducted, including the ones on the 16th, were conducted independently. So normally in law enforcement, when you have two suspects and that are suspected in a crime and law enforcement arrests them, the first thing that law enforcement does is separate them. Why? Because they don't want them talking and getting their story together. I mean, this is an investigation 101. And that's exactly what happened here. We have these literally 7 interviews of a 13-year-old boy and Todd explaining to law enforcement on the day. So this isn't occurring weeks later or months later or years later. This is happening contemporaneous with the crime. And what we know from investigations is that the best information from a witness is that contemporaneous information to the event. So the closer to the event, the better, because you don't want that information contaminated. You don't want that person talking to other people
Objection,
or other.
vouching, improper testimony. Again, what he's saying is, if I understand it, and certainly the court can make the determination, is that they were telling the truth because their stories were closer in time to the events in question. How is that not a credibility determination, saying they were telling the truth then, but were not later on?
Well, and I think the answer is turning into a narrative. Let's just have a new question, please, Ms. Thompson.
I'll ask another question, Your Honor. Did you see evidence of confirmation bias in the way that authorities relied on the text messages and the messages between witnesses in this case?
Yes, in certain circumstances I did.
And can you explain what evidence of confirmation bias you saw in that respect?
Well, there was a couple of texts that Amy had related to a confrontation that she'd had with her mother-in-law, Peggy Munson. And those texts, if you take the text out of context, it appears that Amy is talking about Todd, that she's going to, if this ever happens again, I'm going to leave, take the kids. And then, so it sounds very damaging by itself, but if you take it within the context of all of the other texts, you realize that she's not talking about Todd. She's talking about her relationship with her mother-in-law and the problems that she had there. And that goes on for a couple of days. And she even has that discussion with Todd. So I think it's really important that you take all of these conversations in context and look at what's going on before and after the conversations.
Just one moment, Your Honor. The text messages that you were just referencing, Mr. Safrick, do you understand that that Miss Mullis's mother-in-law in this case was Elaine Mullis? Do you recall? Go ahead, Mr. Safrick.
Sorry?
Do you recall, as you sit here today, the name of
Oh,
Mr. Mullis's mother or Miss Mullis's mother-in-law?
yeah, sorry, I misspoke. Right.
In general, the testimony that you've provided today, if Mr. Mullis's counsel had consulted with you before Mr. Mullis's trial, is this information that you could have provided to Mr. Mullis's attorney?
Yes.
I don't have any other questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Safrick.
Good morning, Counselor.
How long have you had what was your experience length in law enforcement specifically?
In law enforcement?
Yes.
Well, I started in 1977 as a police officer working in patrol. As I said, I promoted into detective, started in property crimes, went to violent crimes. And then in 1983, I applied to the FBI. I got in, and my first office was working in Indian Reservation in Wyoming. I worked there for 3.5 years, working all the violent crimes on the reservation. I went and then was transferred to the New York City office. Is this what you're looking for?
Mostly, I was just trying to check. I believe it's 30 years or so that you had in law enforcement, right?
Oh, yes, yes.
So is the bulk of your experience testifying in court is actually from an agent perspective, correct? Or an officer perspective too?
Well, I was a supervisory special agent in the behavioral analysis unit.
Right, but in court cases specifically, is the bulk of your testimonial experience when you've taken the stand has been as an officer or an agent, right?
Yes.
And your background is in law enforcement specifically, fair?
That's very broad. I don't know what you mean by law enforcement.
You have no expertise or specialization in psychology, fair? You're not a psychologist?
Correct.
Not a psychiatrist?
Correct.
As you confirmed on direct examination, you're not a doctor, right?
That's right.
So you're in the fields of psychology, such as social psychology, you aren't able to speak to the dynamics between people, fair?
No, I wouldn't say that's true.
Well, you are not a social psychologist who has been certified to testify on that matter specifically, the social psychology of interfamilial relationships, right?
No, I testify about relationship dynamics all the time as an expert witness.
Correct, but your primary expertise, in fact, for the bulk of it, your expertise is in the field of crime scene analysis or law enforcement investigation, right?
Well, yes, I would say that crime scene analysis is the baseline for all of the type of analysis that I do, yes.
And in your report, you detail it as crime scene analysis as being your primary expertise as well, fair?
I don't know that I detail it in my report that way. As I said, crime scene analysis is sort of the bedrock of all of the type of analysis that I do in complex death assessment cases, whether they're homicides or serial murders or equivocal deaths. I have extensive training in that area.
Correct, but on page 3 of your report specifically, you say, quote, 2 published appellate opinions allow my expert testimony in crime scene analysis, right?
Right, I have lots of opinions. I have lots of appellate courts that have upheld my testimony many times. I only put those in there because they were published opinions.
Well, the Illinois Supreme Court also issued a published opinion in People v. King. Are you aware of that case?
I am, yes.
And they found, in that case, would you agree that the appellate court or the Supreme Court of the state of Illinois found your testimony inadmissible in its entirety, correct?
Yes.
And it relied on a similar case by the New Jersey appellate court as well, finding similar testimony on profiling, for instance, or what your testimony was being offered in that case went beyond the bounds of your expertise, correct?
I've never testified about profiling. Profiling is not allowed in the court. Profiling is essentially linking the defendant to the behaviors at the crime scene that would interfere with the purview of the jury and the court and the judge. I've never testified about criminal profiling. And
not even in the case of...
Are you speaking about the Fortin case?
Well, on the matter
You're talking about the New Jersey. Are you talking about New Jersey? Is that the Fortin case?
I believe it's State v. Lennon, if that sounds correct.
Yeah, that's the Fortin case, yes.
And similarly, you were found or profiled as an ex-FBI profiler in the case of, I believe, Raymond Lee Jennings, correct? Are you familiar with that case?
Objection.
Yes.
It just, the question, I think, was you were found or profiled as an expert. I just didn't understand the term that the counsel was using there, Your Honor.
Did you wish to clarify, counsel? I mean, I guess I heard the witness answer, so apparently the witness wasn't confused.
I mean, I can clarify, Your Honor, but the witness already answered the question.
I guess, Ms. Thompson, if you just want to come back on redirect, you can clarify.
Understood, Your Honor.
Well, you mentioned that you've never done profiling before, and you would agree that it would be inadmissible testimony to do a profile, correct?
Yes.
But similar matters, or I guess your testimony in People v. King at the appellate level labeled your testimony profiling of characteristics consistent with crimes. Would you agree with that?
I don't know how they characterize it, but I've never testified about profiling.
So today you're not providing a profile, for instance, of who would have committed this crime, right?
No.
But you are profiling the victim in what you've coined as victimology, right?
Right. You have to understand the history of the victim is when you're looking at a death scene case.
You comment on her behaviors as being manipulative or otherwise, right?
Objection, Your Honor. That was not his testimony today.
Overruled. The witness can answer if he's able.
So part of so you're taking things out of context here. I said that when you look at Amy's conversations with various people, she presents a different side of herself to whomever she's talking to. That is a relatively normal thing most people do, depending on the relationship that a person has with the person they're talking to.
But you would agree. Thank you, Mr. Stafford. But my question really was, you refer to her at times as being described as manipulative or otherwise. Fair? In your report?
Yes, I did.
So those findings comment on her characteristics as a victim, right?
Well, I've characterized a lot of things about her.
Right, her personal traits, fair?
Right, and this was also referred to by other witnesses who described her the same way.
So I guess, Mr. Stafford, is it fair to say that you drew all of your inferences from the existing record evidence established or collected by law enforcement on this side of things, or presented at trial? Is that about right?
Well, I didn't do any independent investigation. I didn't, go to the scene and conduct an investigation. So as I always do, I have to rely on the reports and the investigation conducted by law enforcement and others associated with the case, like the medical examiners and toxicologists and such.
But on direct examination, you testified that there was no scene in this case. Is that right?
There was no staged scene.
Well, you would agree that Amy Mullis was found on her hands and knees on your review, right?
She was found with her hands tucked under her, yes, lying on the floor in the shed.
And she was found impaled by a corn rake.
Yes.
And you would agree that based on the evidence you reviewed, at least, Mr. Mullis sent his son to find the pet carrier check on it, right?
Correct.
And ultimately sent him in to find his mother. True?
I don't think he sent him to find her. He sent him to get the pet carrier.
And in doing so, find his mother, right? Or found
Yes.
his mother.
He did.
And then Mr. Mullis grabbed the corn rake and pulled it out of Miss Mullis's back, right?
Yes.
And in doing so, touched the weapon, in this case, or what would be called a poor weapon, I believe, as you characterized it, right?
Yes.
And so there wouldn't be any DNA evidence, typically, that you'd be able to pull from the handle of the rake, right?
Why wouldn't you be able to pull DNA evidence?
Well, let's say fingerprints. Mr. Mullis's fingerprints would be on the rake then, right?
They could be.
So in your experience of 30 years in law enforcement, you would agree pulling latent prints might be difficult, right?
Pulling a latent prints depends on the surface you're pulling them from. So if you have an old, worn, dirty corn rake handle made out of wood, probably be difficult to pull latent prints.
And so when Mr. Mullis pulled the corn rake out of Amy Mullis's back, he discarded it next to her at some point, right?
Yes.
And you
Hey, you know what? He works on a farm. It's his corn rake that he uses on his farm. Wouldn't his fingerprints already be on it? So what the heck difference does that make if his fingerprints is on it? That doesn't make sense.
would agree that based on the record evidence, Mr. Mullis admitted to putting the rake in that shed, correct?
Well, yes, his recollection was that, 2 weeks prior, he set it against, but he hadn't seen it since. Set it against the wall, but hadn't seen it since.
But he was the last person, based upon your review of the records, who knew or saw that corn rake with any certainty, right?
Yes.
And it was Mr. Mullis who sent Amy Mullis to get that pet carrier, correct?
Yes,
So he sent her to a specific location, right?
yes,
For a specific purpose, right? Where
correct.
nobody else would be, true?
Well, I mean, he didn't know that his other children wouldn't be out there.
Well, you're speculating on that front, fair? You don't know one way or the other. You have never interviewed those kids, and you have no testimonial statements one way or the other as to whether he thought they'd be in there, right?
Objection, Your Honor.
No, but look, I'm
I'm
looking
sorry,
at
Mr.
this.
Saffrick, there was an objection.
Oh, I'm
It's,
sorry.
you know, I'll withdraw the objection, Your Honor.
Oh, now the objection's withdrawn. You may continue your answer.
So I'm looking at all of this is what is reasonable? You know, what is likely by reasonable inference? So the information is that Todd and Tristan were in the hog barn with Amy for an hour maybe. So there's no way he would actually know where his other two children were.
Well, you know he left them inside the house, right?
Yeah, but they're 8 and 10, they're kids. So
Well, in the
you'd
middle
have to
of,
you'd have to be certain that
but
they
you,
weren't going to be outside.
but you can't be certain that he didn't know they were going to remain inside, right? Because you don't have any independent information and you have conducted no investigation yourself, right?
Correct.
You speak at length about the manners of death to be investigated, right? The 5 different manners of death that are recognized, true?
Well, just in terms of an equivocal death evaluation, yes.
But ultimately, you agree that in your conclusions, you were asked to provide an opinion on whether the manner of death in this case was homicide or that there was a more logical explanation for Amy's death, right?
Right. When I got the case, I didn't know anything about the case in terms of, you know, I knew how she died, but what the manner of death was, I didn't know. That was my point. It was to conduct an equivocal death evaluation that basically determined that it was either going to be that the 2 most consistent manners would either be homicide or accident.
So your conclusion was the 2 most consistent manners of death, in your opinion, would be homicide or accident.
Right, because there was nothing there that indicated this was a natural death, and there was nothing, in my experience, in terms of having seen well over 4,000 homicide cases and death cases, that this was a suicide. So, you know, by reasonable inference, you're left with either accident or homicide.
You would agree that Google searches in the history as introduced at trial, though, about, quote, what happens to cheaters in history, in, quote, killing unfaithful women, would point to potential motive or any purpose, right? Based upon your understanding of planning.
Well, see, counselor, I think you're taking that out of context. That's not very good of you to do that.
Oh.
It's completely out of context. Those searches appeared to be related to schoolwork.
Your testimony today is that, quote, killing unfaithful women was a school assignment?
You're taking it out of context. I think that's my opinion. There is information that suggests that these were searches done by the kids.
And I might have missed it in your report. Did you at any point reference those Google searches?
No, I did not.
So nothing that would have potentially cut against the point. You only found one factor that weighed in favor of finding it was a homicide, right?
Objection, Your Honor.
Yes, I did.
The basis of your objection, Ms. Thompson.
That's a compound question, Your Honor, but the witness has answered, so I'll withdraw the objection.
The objection's overruled. The answer will remain in the record.
And that was that most women are murdered by people they know. That's right?
Yes.
But you didn't weigh any other motive evidence, did you?
Counselor, I reviewed all this information in detail. I was open to the possibility that this was a homicide and that counsel that contacted me was, incorrect. And that was my job, to figure out what, based on the information and my review of all the information, what was the most likely and consistent manner of death. That was my job. And I considered it homicide as well.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but in your report, you don't mention Tristan Mullis's trial testimony, do you?
I don't know. I listed everything that I used, that I received and reviewed. I have to say that I wrote this report in the end of 2022, beginning of 2023. So it is several years old for me at this point. But I have listed everything that I reviewed.
Well, I'll ask you this question. Do you recall anywhere in your report that you testified to your conclusions at length on direct examination, for instance? That report, do you mention Tristan Mullis's testimony that Todd Mullis's father was out of his sight for an indeterminate amount of time?
If you can reference to me, I believe you're referencing an interview with Tristan that occurred well over a year after the incident.
I'm not, Mr. Safrick. Did you review the trial transcripts in this case?
If I have them listed, I did.
But you don't make reference or note them in your report, do you?
Well, I listed in my report what I reviewed.
So I guess I'll phrase it in the hypothetical then, Mr. Safrick. In your opinion, if Tristan Mullis under oath swore that his father left the hog barn and left his site for an indeterminate amount of time at trial, would that change your testimony?
No.
Why?
Because, as I said before, the initial interviews are, in my experience, the most accurate, and when they're the contemporaneous with the event, they were unfiltered, unbiased, unimpeded. There was nobody to influence him. By the time trial has come around, what he heard and who has talked to him and who has influenced him, I don't know. But those kinds of that kind of testimony is problematic for me. I relied on the contemporaneous interviews done by law enforcement on that day, multiple interviews with both Tristan and Todd, independent, where their stories were exactly the same.
Well, Mr. Safrick, I'm going to ask a follow-up question on this one. Does it change the fact that at each time Tristan Mullis took an oath to tell the truth and testify in a deposition or a court proceeding like you did today, does that weigh in favor of finding that to be a potential protective factor, that maybe this was a homicide?
Again, I reviewed in my complete review that everything suggests that this was not a staged case and that this was not a homicide.
Correct. But my question was, does Tristan Mullis's sworn testimony that Todd Mullis left his site change the fact that those are his under oath statements, and the statements you reference were not under oath?
Objection.
I understand.
Objection, Your Honor. That misstates the testimony and the facts in this case.
Overruled. The witness can answer.
Yes, I understand what you're asking. I understand that those statements were under oath, but I would consider them. But I would say that in the context of everything that I reviewed, though the contemporaneous statements made by a 13-year-old boy were accurate, and he repeated those statements. And not only that it's consistent. His statements and Todd's statements are consistent with what would be expected if you found your wife, unresponsive in a shed. Those activities of lifting her head and wiping her face, all of those things are consistent with somebody rendering aid, yelling at your son to get the truck. Those are all consistent, and those statements were consistent. So I would value those statements in the context of everything that I reviewed more than I would the statements under oath.
So the sworn testimony is less than the unsworn statements, yes? Did I just understand that correctly? I'm only confirming as a yes or no.
Sure. Yes. Yes. That's how I would view that. Yes.
Do you have your report in front of you, Mr. Safrick?
I do.
Can I refer you to page 6 if possible?
Certainly.
Let me know when you're there, please.
I will. Okay.
In the first paragraph at the top of page 6, in the last sentence, I believe, I'll read aloud and let me know if I read it correctly. Quote, "In this case, I yielded the attempt to reconstruct an exact sequence of events. Such an attempt is impractical due to the innumerable possible interactions between Amy, the environment, and others." Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
In your opinion, then, an accident reconstruction wasn't feasible here. Is that fair to say?
No, what I'm saying is that oftentimes when I'm questioned at trial, counsel will ask me, isn't it possible that this could have occurred? And generally what I would say is that when you're dealing with what's possible, literally thousands of things are possible. It's impossible to know the exact sequence to the second of what is actually occurring. So rather than dealing with possibilities, which is nearly impossible, my job is to look at what is likely by reasonable inference from the evidence, the physical evidence, behavioral evidence, forensic evidence. I can't deal with what's possible. The possibilities are endless.
Well, I appreciate that,
That's
Mr.
what
Safrick.
I'm saying there.
I appreciate that, Mr. Safrick, but on
Sure.
page 6, you are speaking about reconstructing the exact sequence of events, correct?
Right.
And so you said such an attempt to events, I believe those are your words, is impractical, right?
Correct.
So in your opinion, it would be impractical to be able to speak to any certainty about the exact sequence of events, right?
Yes, you can't speak to certainty about the exact sequence, and I don't know the exact sequence, literally any crime that I looked at, but I can draw reasonable inferences based on the evidence.
So, yes, as we work towards the end here,
Sure.
we can agree that just ask Amy Mullis to go get the carrier, right?
Yes,
To a location, right?
he did.
And we can agree that at least Tristan Mullis's sworn testimony was that his father left his site for an immeasurable amount of time or an unknown amount of time, right?
Objection, Your Honor. That misstates the testimony.
Well,
I don't know what the sworn testimony was.
the answer will remain in the record.
But you referenced and cite in your report, which you have in front of you right now, Mr. Safrick, that you reviewed the trial transcripts, right?
Like, I don't know. I have multiple pages of things I reviewed. I don't recall if I did, or if it's listed here, I did. I just, I just have multiple pages, and it was a couple years ago I wrote this, so.
And in this period of time, you have never once evaluated reports or information provided by a Valentina Nye, for instance, right?
I'm sorry, by who?
That, I think, answers my question. You haven't referred to reports or reviewed reports from one Valentina Nye, right?
No, I have not. Dr. Nye? No.
Correct. Dr. Nye would be a way to
No.
refer to her.
That's correct. I have not reviewed any reports of hers.
And your conclusions around the scene and the distances between buildings aren't based on your research or your findings specifically, right?
Right, I relied on other experts who conducted those measurements.
And would you agree that there is a difference or a distinction between one being dead or deceased and one being pronounced dead?
I'm not clear on your question.
Sure.
Someone's dead or they're pronounced dead?
So Amy Mullis was pronounced dead at the hospital, correct?
She was.
But she was found unresponsive in the shed on your review, correct?
Yes.
And there were not signs of life accordingly at that point in time. Is that a fair description of the evidence or the record?
Objection, Your Honor. This is calling for a medical opinion from this witness, which he stated he's not providing.
Well, the witness can certainly, I guess, testify as to his understanding based on his review of the records. I won't interpret his testimony as providing any medical opinion. With that understanding, Mr. Safrick, you may answer the question if you remember it at this point.
I do. Thank you, Your Honor. Yes, I don't believe there was there's anything that indicated she's dead. She was transported. They were doing CPR on her at the roadside. And I believe, if my recollection serves me correctly, that the doctors in the hospital worked on her for over an hour. So at some point she was pronounced deceased, but there's no evidence that she was deceased when Todd found her in the shed.
Did you find any?
She was unresponsive, but no indication she had already passed.
Did she ever come to or become responsive again based upon your review of the evidence?
Counselor, that would be a question for the emergency room doctors who worked on her. I don't know.
Although you just testified to what they found or how long they worked on them, right?
I believe that my recollection is they worked on her for about an hour before they pronounced her.
But you can
So
come to
my sense is that they believed that she was alive. I mean, I have a lot of experience with individuals who are either declared deceased at the scene because it's apparently obvious they're deceased, or as soon as they get to the hospital, they're declared deceased. That's not what occurred here. So
she wasn't declared deceased at the hospital?
not immediately. I've had hundreds and hundreds of cases where offenders or where victims are declared deceased as soon as they arrive at the emergency room. But that was not the case here. So I don't know. There's nothing that says that she was deceased, and people believed because they were working on her that she was still alive.
Sure. Mr. Safrick, we were provided a list of your prior testimony in the last 4 years. I believe that lists, is it 2 trials that you've testified in? Or 1 trial?
I don't have that list in front of me, but whatever, it should be accurate, yes.
How many trials do you believe you've testified in the last 4 years or so?
Trials, probably those 2.
And
if there's 2 on there.
You also list depositions, I believe, for a grand total of 4 items or 5 items or so. Does that sound about right?
Yes. If I provided that, that's accurate, yes.
And it isn't in criminal cases specifically, right?
Well, they're civil cases, but they're all related to criminal, typically homicides. So I have to evaluate all of those homicide scenes.
Sure. And how much were you paid for this case?
Well, not enough. But I did a lot of work pro bono after. I got paid initially, but I've done a lot of work pro bono, and I've not, just because, they don't really have the money. And I think it's worthwhile to provide my insight in this case.
Thank you, but that didn't actually answer my question. How much were you paid on this case?
I think $10,000.
Okay. And how much pro bono work have you done?
I do a lot of pro bono work for various organizations. All my work for the VDOC Society is pro bono. I do other cases pro bono. So.
Right, but I am asking specifically about this case, Mr.
Oh,
Stafford.
this case. Right. A lot of my time, probably, 25 to 30 hours has been pro bono.
Is your hourly rate $500 an hour for a 4-hour minimum?
That's my testimony for depositions, but my hourly rate is 400 for analysis and case work.
And how many hours have you done of work on this case?
I don't know offhand.
Could you ballpark it like you did for the 25 to 30 hours of pro bono work?
60 to 70 hours of work. It's been over, I was retained in July of 2022. So it's been, 3 plus 3 years?
So 60 to 70 hours of work total or inclusive of your quote unquote probe hours?
Probably total.
I don't have anything further. Thank you.
Any redirect?
A few questions, Your Honor. Mr. Stafford, I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 281. While this is being pulled up, this is a multi-page document, and I'm going to have my colleague scroll through Exhibit 281, and I'm going to ask you if this looks like a true and accurate copy of your CV and your report in this case.
I'll object, Your Honor. This isn't in evidence, and certainly it includes hearsay statements and testimony, and we would, have that evidentiary fight later on, but we've been having it for quite some time, so as the court knows, we would reiterate our same objections here. Also, this report's unsigned out of compliance with the rules of civil procedure and therefore not properly applied to. But we would raise our standard objection. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I guess, counsel, were there additional arguments that you wish to address at a later time with regard to this exhibit, or?
I'm just showing him a CV, Your Honor. That was my intention right now.
Okay. Well, go ahead with that for now.
Yes, this is my CV. When I update my CV, I change the date at the bottom of the pages, so it shows January of 2025. I think I had an article published, and so I updated the CV, but that's accurate.
All right, and Exhibit 281 is a true and accurate copy of your CV and your report in this case?
Well, all I can see is the CV at the moment. But yeah, that's my CV, yes.
Let me know when you've had a chance to determine whether this is a true and accurate copy of your report.
Okay. Yes. I was looking for the date on it. Appears to be yes.
Your Honor, we
If
can,
it's 57 pages, then yes.
all right, and Your Honor, we can take up any other issues with this document at a later time.
All right. We'll do that.
You can take the document down. You were asked some questions about medical issues.
Darn it. Crap, I was muted the whole time. Shoot. I was saying that the ribbon was green. It's faded. It was green for lymphoma. You can barely see it. And the purple is for fibromyalgia. And it says survivor, but it's probably flipped. I don't know if it's flipped for you guys or not. But it says survivor. I need to get like ×2 put at the bottom. So it's green and purple. So it's the green is for lymphoma. So the body's like the cancer ribbon. And then the wings are purple for fibromyalgia. And I got it after the first bout. Actually, I didn't get it. My best friend bought it for me. It was like $80 for this little thing. And I showed it to my oncologist. And she was like, "Oh, I don't know about that. Maybe you should have waited." And I was like, "Oh no, don't be like that. Don't think like that." And then I came back. Actually, it was a different kind. It's still lymphoma, but it was a different kind. The first kind had a cure rate of 80%. And I said, I don't want to know cure rates because my mom died from a surgery that had a 98% recovery rate. I said, so don't give me percentages because I don't put trust in percentages. And then I got the second kind of lymphoma, and there is no percentage rate because that can just be in your body dormant forever. So I'm going to have scans periodically or checkups periodically, like for the rest of my life, to make sure that one never comes back. And I can't remember if I finished telling you guys, I started the other day and got sidetracked. I filled out the thing for the Roundup lawsuit, and I got a text back that I would be like a really good candidate or whatever. And I got all excited. I told you guys on a live stream. So then when I talked to them, they were like, no, because you have to actually be the one that was spraying the Roundup. I was like, are you kidding me? And so then I did another one and talked to a different lawyer. Same thing. I was standing right there. It doesn't matter. Okay. I almost died, but sure.
This case. Did you review reports from a forensic pathologist and a biomechanical engineer related to the Mullis case, Mr. Safrick?
I did.
And do you defer to the expert opinions of those experts in their respective fields?
I do.
And do you, when you indicate that you are not able to determine sort of when you are not able to determine exactly how events might have transpired here, do you intend to offer an opinion about whether a biomechanical engineer could offer opinions about that topic?
No, I don't.
I mean, are you disputing the opinions of biology and biomechanical experts in this case?
No, I'm not.
You were asked some questions about the Rake and some of the things that occurred after Ms. Mullis was found in this case. Was Mr. Mullis removing the Rake from Ms. Mullis, was that an attempt, is that behavior that's consistent with staging a scene?
No.
Why not?
Again, the purpose of staging is to create a scene that law enforcement can attend, the investigators can attend, and then see the scene and make their assessments on the adulterated, changed scene. Because again, you're trying to create a new mode for the crime, and then that's what you want law enforcement to see. So you don't create and then just it. And everything that I saw is consistent with rendering aid. It's consistent in their statements as well, with him rendering aid.
If there is testimony in this case that Mr. Mullis's daughter, who was a minor, saw the corn rake in the shed near the time that Miss Mullis suffered her injuries, would that change your opinion that Todd Mullis was the only person to reference seeing the rake in that area?
Objection leading.
Overruled.
Yes, I knew that the kids played in the shed, and Tristan suggested at one point that maybe they had moved the rake. But I don't think anybody knew where the rake was. It was never identified in a particular location, except I think Todd said a couple weeks prior, he put it against the shed door.
And are Todd's statements about where he left the rake, are those consistent with someone staging the scene, as you've testified about?
Objection, vouching and improper testimony for through prejudice.
Sustained.
You know, I didn't ask you your opinion about how you would evaluate the cause of Ms. Mullis's death, but the state did. So I'll ask you, I mean, did you reach a conclusion about what the likely cause of Ms. Mullis's death was?
Objection, improper opinion testimony. He can't come to a pathological diagnosis, Your Honor.
They opened the door to this, Your Honor.
Did you want to respond to that, Mr.
Sure.
Rudin?
We didn't have a report. We didn't ask for his report to provide us an ultimate testimonial determination. Ultimately, the question was, isn't the basis of your report in the ultimate conclusion for you to decide whether or not this was a homicide or an accident? That's what's cited at 56 and 57. When he was coming to a determination, he said he couldn't speak to a manner of death specifically because he's not to undermine the pathological opinions or the medical opinions here. Simply put, that's the basis of that testimony, was to object on the basis of that he is not an expert who can provide that.
I guess, Ms. Thompson, that's how I understood the witness's answer as well. If you understood or believe something differently, you may respond, but otherwise the objection is sustained.
Well, this, just to make clear my point, Your Honor, I mean, the state asked him a number of questions about why he did not determine this was a homicide. We don't intend to conclusions. It's our position we should be able to inquire about his conclusions as well, but I understand the court's ruling and I'll abide by it.
Thank you.
One moment, Your Honor.
I don't like the way the prosecution is attacking this witness. Is it just me, or does he seem like he's just mad at these witnesses? This was a guy asked to write a report. Yet he's being attacked. I'm too thin-skinned. I would not have made a good lawyer. As much as I'm interested in law, God knew what he was doing when he wanted me to be a nurse.
Two more questions, Your Honor. One is, Mr. Safrick, you were asked some questions about whether you're testifying as a profiler in this case. Are any of your opinions in Mr. Mullis's case based on your experience in profiling possible criminal defendants. Your Honor, I don't know if the witness was able to hear me. It might have been because my mic was off. I apologize. Let me just read. Mr. Safrick, I assume you could not hear my question. I apologize. I think my mic was off. So let me restate.
No, I didn't hear anything.
Apologies. Let me restate that question. You were asked some questions on cross about whether the opinions you were providing in this case were based on your experience as a profiler. And my question for you is, are any of the opinions that you're offering about the Mullis investigation opinions you're offering in the context of being able to profile potential criminal defendants?
No.
I don't have any other questions, Your Honor.
Any recross?
None needed, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Safrick. It appears that your testimony is complete. I'll go ahead and
Thank you.
end the Zoom at this time.
Thank you, Your Honor.
For those of us here in the courtroom, this is probably a good point to take our morning recess. Let's break for about 15 minutes and plan on picking up at 11:20. Court is in recess until then.
I don't think Belle got affected by it. Um, she's been really healthy her whole life until like the last year or so, I guess. And I think that's just her age. She's got like chronic UTIs, urinary tract infections. But they clear up and come back and clear up and come back. I think that's just her age. She's lost a lot of weight too. So she's 13. Yeah, 13. So was he the prosecutor in the trial? In Todd Mullis' trial? Maybe he just feels like he did a good job and now they're trying to come back and screw him up. I don't know. I think that a lot of times they take things too personally. They're just doing their job. Yeah, it's somebody's life, but it's still it's just a job. I mean, I would just conviction relief hearing, but I think just the fact that he was able to get the hearing means that there might actually be some merit to this. Because I've never heard of anybody else getting one of these. This is the first one I've ever seen. I have a weird thing when it comes to the FBI. Because I probably shouldn't say this on YouTube. I don't trust the FBI. But I love Criminal Minds. So like while I don't trust the FBI in general, I hold profilers up to like this higher standard. So when it comes to things like John Douglas and his books about, you know, how they did things, how they started the BAU, how they, or it was the BSU back then, they changed the name, how they like how they caught the Unabomber and those types of things just fascinate me. Who was the guy? I did an episode on him. Robert Hansen, I think his name was, the FBI agent that was selling secrets to the Soviets during the Cold War. Like the way they caught him, they used the FBI and the CIA, and they did a sting to catch him, and that stuff just fascinates me. But on the whole, as an agency, don't trust them not one bit. So I'm conflicted when it comes to the FBI. Yeah, but I don't know about dogs. Can dogs even have cranberries? Somebody Google it. Where's my phone? Oh my God. Can dogs have cranberries? Yes, in moderation. Okay, if y'all didn't know, I have ADHD. Self-diagnosed. But self-diagnosed from knowing people that actually, I keep these things like, this is caused by ADHD and that is caused by ADHD. And I'm like, oh, that explains a lot. I'm pretty sure I have that. And so I hate how when you go to Google on your phone, you get stories. Half the time, I don't even look up what I went to Google to look up. The first story, apparently, it isn't. Wait, okay, I'm gonna have to read the stupid article. Is it a show or a movie? Audio. What? Star Trek Con, the scripted audio series. No. What do you mean audio series? How? What the fudge audio series? Because as Naveen Andrews is in it. Naveen Andrews was in Lost. Do you guys remember Lost? I don't want to listen to an audio series. I want to watch a TV show and look at Naveen Andrews. What are you talking about? Audio series. Oh, come on, StreamYard. Change the layout. I'm going to get mad in a minute. Uh-oh. It's stuck again, y'all. Nothing's happening yet. There's sound in the courtroom, but it's stuck. Well, the problem is they're probably not. How is it unstuck on my channel but not unstuck on StreamYard?
Please
They
be
might
seated.
not eat it because they're picky eaters. They like Brussels sprouts, but they won't eat stuff dogs normally eat.
Ms. Nichols Cook, additional evidence?
Yes, Your Honor. The applicant would call Lynn White.
All right. Ms. White? Take your time, please. You can come forward and have a seat in the chair to my left.
There's no chair.
Yep, go ahead. Oh,
There's no chair.
our chair disappeared. Well, that's interesting. We can grab one from over here. Thank you. Thank you. if you'd raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give will be true and correct?
Yes.
Okay. You can turn that microphone on in front of you there. There's a button in the bottom center. And then feel free to adjust the chair and the microphone so that you can sit comfortably.
There you go.
Yep, okay.
What was the second part of that? I'm sorry.
Oh, feel free to adjust the chair and the microphone so that you can sit comfortably.
All right.
Okay, Ms. Nichols-Cook, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. White. How are you?
Good morning. Very well, thank you.
Can you state your name for the record and spell your name for the court reporter?
Lynn White, White.
And Ms. White, how do you know Todd Mullis?
I am his older sister,
And where do you currently live?
Dubuque County.
Did you grow up here in Delaware County?
Yes, I did.
And what do you do for work?
Currently, I am a office manager for a construction company,
How long have you been there?
14 years.
Prior to that, what did you do?
I was a city clerk treasurer for a small town in Dubuque County for 10 years, a neighboring county for 5 years as a deputy clerk, and I also worked in the banking industry for 5 years.
Do you have other siblings in addition to Todd?
Yes.
Who are they?
I have an older sister, Lori, an older sister, Mike, and the two younger boys, Pat and Todd.
And Mike's your brother.
Correct.
We've heard some references in other testimony about Lynn and Mike. Would that be you and your brother Mike that people are talking about as far as helping with things around the family farms?
Yes.
And then is Leroy Mullis your dad?
Yes.
Do your parents and your brothers all live close to where Todd and Amy Mullis were living in 2018?
Yes, all within about 5 miles.
And does your family, including your parents and your brothers, do they currently farm?
Yes.
Have they always farmed?
Yes.
Is it crops or livestock?
Both.
Both. In the spring of 2018, do you know who was planting crops?
Todd planted the corn and Mike planted the beans.
And in 2018, do you know who would harvest crops?
In 2018, it was Todd that ran the combine along with Mike.
Can you tell us about your relationship with Todd's wife, Amy?
I was in their wedding. I am the godmother of their daughter. At holidays, we would play cards together, do the dishes together, throw darts in the yard. I would stop on occasion to the farm and just visit.
I want to talk now specifically about the summer and the fall of 2018, okay?
Okay.
Do you remember learning that Amy's grandmother was ill and eventually passed away?
Yes.
Did you learn about any other family issues that Amy had going on that were
I-
affecting Todd and the kids?
I believe that her uncle was also in the hospital. He had some sort of brain bleed, and she was assisting her mom in taking care of her uncle.
Do you know if that required Amy to be gone from Delaware County at times?
Yes.
Did you have interactions with Todd and the kids and Amy during the summer and the fall of 2018?
Yeah, I would see them on occasion, yes.
Did you have any concerns about Todd and Amy's relationship?
None.
I want to talk now specifically about November 10th, 2018. Do you remember what you were doing that day?
I was babysitting my 2 grandsons.
Did you get a call that day about Amy?
Yes.
Can you tell us what you did after you got that call?
After I got the call, I assigned the babysitting duties to my husband, and I jumped in the car and I went to the hospital.
What did you see when you got to the hospital?
At the hospital, we went into the family room, and there was some friends that were in the family room, along with Todd sitting in a chair. His eyes were red. I could tell he had been probably crying or was upset. And there was, I believe, I'm not exact, but I think that, I mean, there was other people in the room, but I don't know who they were.
Okay, no, that's okay. And if I ever ask a question that you're not sure about, please ask me to ask it again.
Okay.
While you were in the waiting room, did you learn that Amy passed away?
They had come and asked Todd to go back to the emergency room where she was at, and when he came back, they said she had passed away.
At this point in time, what was your understanding of what had happened to Amy?
There was a farm accident at the farm, something with the red shed.
Did you help Todd with the logistics and the arrangements for Amy after that point?
Yes,
Did you help him make the funeral arrangements?
yes. I went along with her mom and stepdad, and Taylor, I believe, also went along to help. And we made the funeral arrangements in Manchester.
After the funeral arrangements had been made, did you learn that there were concerns that Amy's death was not an accident?
When I was going up to the farm, on, I believe it was the 16th, I had called Todd that I was on the way, and he said that he had gotten a call from Sheriff LeClaire that he wanted him to stop in at the office, and they were gonna get the file basically kind of wrapped up, closed up, and so we could move on. So,
And I don't want you to, I want to make sure I keep asking. So on November 16th, is that when you became aware that there were concerns about Amy's death not being an accident?
yes,
Okay. And so at that point, you learned that the sheriff wanted to see Todd. What did you do?
I picked him up and I drove him to the sheriff's office for this interview to get it wrapped up. I waited in the waiting room.
Do you know how long you were in the waiting room while Todd was with the sheriff?
It was approximately 2 to 3 hours at least.
What happened when you and Todd left the sheriff's office that day?
They had told me they issued us, what do they call them, subpoena, and that they wanted to get Amy's phone from the farm. And so we basically drove back to the farm then with just in the car with the subpoena or in our hand, was reading it, I guess.
You could have also been like a search warrant.
Oh, yes, that's what it was. Sorry.
At that time, did you learn what investigators thought had happened to Amy?
I'm gonna check. This is calling through based upon hearsay.
Well, overruled. The witness can testify as to her understanding.
When I went into the interview room, Agent Turbot had said that we know Todd did this.
So at that point, in your mind, what are you doing? Like, what are your next steps?
I guess I was in shock, number one. Next step, I thought, where are you coming up with this? Because it was a farm accident. And I was trying to think, who do I call? So.
Did you contact
what
an
my mind
attorney
was.
between the sheriff's office and the farm?
Say that again.
Did you contact an attorney between leaving the sheriff's office and arriving at the farm?
Yes.
Were you at Todd and Amy's then when the search warrant was executed on the 16th?
Yes.
How would you characterize your interactions with law enforcement during that process?
After we had given them the phone, they wanted to see the buildings, and when we were walking to the building, Travis Hemeseth turned around and said, "You need to tell your brother."
Sustained.
If you can characterize it without repeating what someone said to you as far as, was it hostile or angry? Was there a lot of back and forth? What do you recall observing and being a part of?
Can you re-ask that again? Sorry.
When the search warrant is being executed on the 16th, can you describe for us what was happening? Were officers also talking with you and Todd?
I'm going to object, Your Honor, on hearsay and backdoor hearsay, even if we're cabining it where it's not saying specifically what they said. It's
What
based upon
backdoor
those statements and
hearsay?
observations of those statements.
Never
Yeah,
heard that term
I mean, I
before.
think that question is probably inviting hearsay, Ms. Nichols Cook. I'm not sure if maybe you can rephrase.
Let me try, Your Honor. Thank you. Would you characterize the interactions that you had with investigators as being aggressive towards you?
Same objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
You can answer.
Yes.
After the search warrant was executed, did you help Todd make any adjustments to the funeral arrangements for Amy?
Yes. We spoke with Bob Sabers, and we just plain asked him, do we want to wait on getting the cremation process delayed if there's going to be issues?
I'd like to show the witness exhibit 310, just the first page. Let me know if it pops up on your screen.
Tristan definitely was. I don't know about the other kids. I know Tristan testified at trial. I am making.
It's not popping up for some reason. Just a second here, counsel.
Your Honor, maybe approach the witness and show her one of our screens.
You certainly can. It's not acting like it's connected at all, so I'm not sure what the issue is.
Ms. White, do you recognize that document?
Yes.
Can you tell us what it is?
It was the letter that was drafted to by Leonard Funeral Home in order to have them delay the cremation.
I object on hearsay on this letter. The letter's not in evidence, and it's signed by Mr. Mullis, so it's hearsay.
Okay. The objection's overruled. The answer will remain in the record. And you had not offered it yet, correct, Ms. Nichols Cook? All right.
Ms. White, did you help Todd write this letter?
We talked to the funeral home, and the funeral home director is the one that wrote it.
And did you?
I was
type
on the
it up
phone
and
call.
prepare it?
I was on the phone call with the funeral director at the time, yes.
Did you type up this letter?
I don't remember.
Have you seen this letter before today?
Yes.
And is what you've seen today a true and accurate representation of the letter that you helped Todd prepare for the funeral home?
Yes.
At this point, we would move page 1 of 310 into evidence.
Mr. Bakke?
With the caveat, we're just talking about page 1. I have no objection on foundation, but I would object
So it's
on the same hearsay
hearsay.
grounds that it's signed by Mr. Mullis.
.310, page 1 is admitted. The objection's overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. White, I want to move on a little bit and talk about, you mentioned Bob Sabers earlier. Is he an attorney?
Yes,
Were you involved in hiring counsel or representing?
I assisted, yes.
Is Mr. Sabers one of those attorneys that you met with and hired?
Yes.
Do you recall when you first hired Mr. Sabers?
After talking to the lawyer on the way back to the farm, we also asked him, you know, it was not the type of law that he had or practiced. So he suggested some names. We're like, who do we talk to? So he suggested some names and we called Bob. Actually, I called Bob, but
Thank you. Do you recall the date that Todd was arrested for Amy's murder?
February of 2019,
And at that time, did you let Mr. Sabers know about the arrest?
yes. I was at work and I got a phone call from my brother Mike. And so then I proceeded to call Bob and find out what was going on.
And so at some point, did another attorney become involved in representing Todd on these charges?
Yes.
Do you remember his name?
Jake Firehelm?
And while these attorneys were representing your brother, was Todd in the county jail?
Yes.
And at times, was he also moved to the Buchanan County Jail?
Yes.
What was your role with the attorneys while they were representing Todd?
I was kind of the middleman as far as communications. I was the gopher to find information to get to them.
Were you in communication with Todd while he was in the county jail?
Yes, he would call.
How often would he call you?
Oh, probably at every 2 or 3 days, every day. It just depended on the week.
When you said you were the middleman or the person, does that mean you were asking the attorneys questions?
Yes.
And were you also then providing them information or answers to their questions?
Yes, correct.
Was Todd asking you questions?
Yes.
Were you able to give Todd any answers?
None other than they're working on things because I didn't want to get into details over the phone.
Why was that?
The phone calls are recorded.
Do you recall Todd writing notes and letters to the attorneys while he was in jail?
Yes.
Would you also then get copies of those from the attorneys?
I would get the originals from the attorney.
I want to show the witness a prior exhibit 233.
Oh, and it came up.
It popped up now.
Thank you. Ms. White, this exhibit has several pages, but looking at the first page, do you recognize it?
Yes, it's one of Todd's letters.
And we can scroll slowly for you. Does this appear to be a continuation of Todd's writing?
Yes.
Okay. What about this page?
Yes.
And the next one?
Yes.
And the next one?
Yes.
And on this one, do you see a date at the top?
Yes. August 29th, 2019.
Based on your recollection, is this before the criminal trial?
Yes, that was in September.
Next page. Is this also Todd's writing? And continuation of the prior letter?
Yes.
And same question here.
Yes, continuation.
And we've covered all the pages in that exhibit. So can you tell us a little bit about what types of questions and information Todd was looking for while he was in jail?
Well, he kept asking if we were going to have the scene recreated, if we could possibly get experts on what they were looking for.
I'm going to object on hearsay grounds. Party opponent to himself.
Overruled. You may continue with your answer.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I'll ask you another question. Did Todd and you have conversations before he went to jail about, what would happen if he was arrested?
Yes.
And did you get kind of chosen to help, be a voice for him?
Yes.
And so when Todd would communicate with you, either via letter or phone calls, would you take concerns that he had to the attorneys?
Objection leading.
Overruled.
Yes. I would call them and just call them like every day. What's going on? What are we doing?
And did you also send them emails?
Yes.
At any point, did they start sending you updates about the case and what was happening?
They would send phrases along saying we're working on things and just tell me they were working on things. I mean,
What was your understanding of what that meant? We're working on things.
Objection. It's based on hearsay and vague.
Sustained.
What did you think was happening at that time?
Objection calls for speculation.
Asking for her own understanding and to explain the actions that she takes next. It's not asking her to repeat any out-of-court statement for the truth of the matter. It's what she thought was happening.
If you can clarify as to the time period, the witness may answer.
Ms. White, during the time after Todd's arrest, before his trial, when you would have conversations with the attorneys and they told you they were working on things, what did you think was happening?
I'm going to object again on hearsay and speculation.
Overruled.
well, they shared things with me, and in sharing things with me, I would ask them what's being done about materials they had shared with me. If they were working on things, we kept telling them too, it's an accident. What are you finding out? Are you going to recreate this? What are you doing?
Okay. And you said they were sharing things with you. What types of things were you getting?
I got just about everything. Medical examiner reports, her medical records. I've got police reports. I got the Celebrate information. That's what I can recall right now.
And I know earlier I briefly asked about your work history, but to clarify, that didn't include any investigative training or experience?
No,
Any cell phone, Celebrate
no.
type of experience?
Are they trying to invalidate attorney-client privilege?
Do you remember talking with anyone else besides the attorneys directly during this process, during this time period of leading up to trial that worked with the attorneys?
Yes.
Who
I
would that
talked
be?
to the secretary for Jake Firehelm, and the two of us collaborated on a lot of the issues that we had in front of us. I would do things on the Celebrate. I would work up reports and figure out how to get everything in line, and then I would call Christy and ask her if she saw the same thing. And
Okay, I have a question, and I should probably already know the answer to this. Is attorney-client privilege, is that like with HIPAA? With HIPAA, you can waive that. Like, I can tell a hospital, I can write down, I want Travis to know everything that you would tell me. You can tell Travis. He's my emergency contact. You can tell Travis anything about my medical stuff that you would tell me. You can tell him. Can you do that with your lawyer? Can you say, for instance, if I was arrested for something and I had a lawyer, could I tell my lawyer, you can tell Travis anything you can tell me? Does that make the confidentiality go away? So is it not like HIP in that regard? If anybody else knows, it gets rid of privilege?
told her basically, she's like, how did you get that? So then I went through the steps on pulling up the Celebrate information and told her how to basically connect everything together. And then she would let me know that she was going to show this to the attorney, Jake, and share it with Bob.
Did you ask her if they had an expert to review the
I
digital?
told her, I asked her, I said, we need somebody to look at all this. We need a computer guy to do this. But when she asked, well, how did you get that report? I would explain to her and tell her in detail how I come up with what I had.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your objection.
You're safe, Rake.
Overruled, the answer will remain in the record.
To your knowledge, as the person who was representing your family with these attorneys, did either attorney ever consult or hire an expert to review the evidence that you were getting copies of?
We asked several times, but I was not informed anybody was hired, and I kept inquiring, who do we have?
In the weeks leading up to the trial, did the attorneys ask you or the family for any information or assistance?
Yes, we provided them with drone footage of the farm a few days before the trial. We provided them with pictures of the barns, the area where Todd was working at. We provided, actually, Bob had emailed me asking me if I would draft some questions about.
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
It's okay. So was this the first time I asked you to do things to help with their
Not the
representation?
first time. I offered, what can we do? How can we help? What do we need to do to help in the act, to get information out to show.
And then did you write questions for witnesses
Yes,
and provide those to the attorneys?
yes, since the attorneys didn't have a background on some of the people on the deposition list, they just said, can you give us a little background on these people and maybe draft some questions as to what to ask them in the deposition.
Had you ever hired and worked with attorneys before?
Hired, I've got a tax attorney. Other than that, through my work at the city, we had a city attorney. At my job now, we have attorneys there. I don't hire them, but I
For a
work with
personal
them.
matter, for a family matter like this?
Not for a family matter like this, no.
Did you have concerns that you brought up to the attorneys before trial?
I kept asking them, are you going to talk to Todd about what's going on? Are you in communications with him? Does he have everything he needs as far as what's going to be presented? Several times we talked.
What was your impression after phone calls with Todd about whether he had information about what the attorneys were doing?
I'm gonna, this is based on hearsay or backdoor hearsay.
Sustained.
Um, um, I need just a moment, Your Honor.
So if something like this that's improper happens,
Would Todd communicate frustration to you?
Yes.
Same objection.
I'm not asking for a statement. It can't.
so if something improper happens and you can't explain it unless it's hearsay, I mean, because it's hearsay, then how do you let somebody know? Oh my God, this is getting painful. This is getting painful to watch. I feel bad for her. She's sick and she's dealing with how to word this question so she can get the answer that she needs. Oh wow, Carla, thanks.
Be hearsay if it's not a statement. So I would.
Overrule. The answer
Thank
will
you.
remain in the record.
Were you able to discern why Todd was frustrated?
He would state that the attorneys would.
Telling me what Todd would say. Could you discern, what it is you needed to do next?
Objection, this is backdoor hearsay. It's
I'm asking for her actions, what she did next. So it's not truth of what Todd said, it's the effect it had on her and what she did.
The objection's overruled. Ms. White, just be careful to talk about what your actions were and not what statements were made to you, okay?
Okay.
Right, you may proceed.
The actions that were taken was to get a hold of the attorneys and see what was going on.
So you were asking more questions.
Yes.
And would you also send them emails?
Yes.
Did they ever ask you to review pleadings before they filed them?
StreamYard got cranky again. It was doing so good for a while.
Did you attend the criminal trial?
Yes, every day.
Were you present in the courtroom during the defense opening statement?
objection, relevance.
Overruled.
You can answer.
So, yes, I was.
What was your reaction to the opening statement?
Objection, relevance.
Overruled.
Dismay, wondering from.
During the trial, did you attempt to speak with the attorneys?
Yes,
Did you ask them questions?
yes,
If you had been informed before the beginning of the trial, counsel was going to concede Amy's death was a homicide, would you have done anything?
I'm going to object as calls for speculation and relevance as to her thoughts of what the trial strategy was.
Sustained.
Ms. White, if you had been informed or made aware about counsel's opening statement, would you have taken any action?
yes.
What would you have done?
Objection. This is relevance into what her actions or statements or conduct would have been in response to trial counsel's trial strategy is not relevant.
Right. Sustained.
If you had known, would you have gotten new counsel for your brother?
Same objection.
Sustained.
Were you ever consulted about proceeding homicide?
Same objection.
Overruled.
No,
To your knowledge, was Todd ever consulted?
Objection. There's no foundation that she was aware of every conversation between trial counsel and relevance, even if there was.
Overruled.
I was not aware of any communications on that, no.
Do you recall talking about after he testified at his trial?
Yes, he called us on the way home, I believe.
Was he upset?
Yes,
Were you upset?
correct.
At that time, in 2019, did you think Amy's death was an accident?
Say that one more time.
At the time of the trial in 2019, did you think Amy's death was an accident?
Yes,
Have you learned anything that's ever changed
no,
your mind? Did you meet with the attorneys after the trial?
yes. we met with Jake. Bob, we didn't meet with him, I don't believe.
Did you ever learn that Todd now thought Amy's death was a homicide?
Objection based on hearsay or backdoor hearsay. It's whether it's if she learned that information, it's based on statements that were made to her. So even if it's cabined in such a way that it's not reflecting the statement, it is based upon the information that was learned that is hearsay.
Sustained.
Miss White, has your brother always maintained his innocence to you?
Yes.
And then I think I just have maybe one thing I forgot to ask you in the beginning. Do you recognize this glass fixture that I'm holding up?
Yes.
Can you tell me what it is?
It's a light cover that they use in the hog buildings to go over the light bulbs.
Did you provide this to the attorneys for
Yes.
the current attorneys for Mr. Mullis?
Yes, I did.
And did it come from the hog barn at the Mullis farm?
Correct.
Your Honor, at this point, we would move to move Exhibit 275 in.
Any objection?
Not on foundation, just on relevance.
275 is admitted.
And Your Honor, I know it's noon, and I need to queue up perhaps my last exhibit. If the court could give me a minute, or if the court wants us to come back after lunch, I'm fine either way.
We can keep going, I think, if it makes sense to finish up your direct.
I know, I feel sorry for her. She's trying to figure out, and she's sick. She has a cold. She slurred her words earlier. I wonder if
Ms.
she
White,
had.
do you remember talking with Todd after he testified at his trial? If that would have been September 22nd, 2019?
Yes.
And I know you mentioned earlier that the calls, when Todd would call you from the jail, they would be recorded. So do you remember him expressing frustration about the questions he was asked on cross-examination?
I'm going to object on hearsay.
So far, as long as you're not responding to specific statements that were made, the objection will be overruled. You can answer.
Was he expressing frustration?
Yes.
And Your Honor, I would like to play this call that we're talking about. I believe it's a prior consistent statement of Mr. Mullis, and so it would satisfy an exception to any hearsay objection to aid Ms. White in her testimony.
He's
And
on the
I would
edge of his seat.
anticipate I know which jail call this is, Your Honor, and I would object that This is not a prior consistent statement that was made under oath at a prior court proceeding. This is simply a jail call between Mr. Mullis and his family member. It falls directly within hearsay. Mr. Mullis, of course, could have testified about his own recollections, testify through another witness.
Which exhibit is this?
It's in the jail calls, I think 375, and there's 686 jail calls in there by my count. So
Ms. Nichols-Cook, I guess, as far as the issue of it being an exception or not, any further record you wish to make on that?
Yes, Your Honor, I think that there was a lot of cross questions about Todd's testimony at trial and whether he conceded it was a homicide in his testimony. And this phone call comes directly after that, in which Mr. Mullis explains that he still thinks it's an accident, but he didn't know how else to answer that question on cross-examination. And it is consistent with all of his prior statements to law enforcement that her death or her injuries were the result of an accident. And that is what he continued to tell his family and his attorneys throughout the process.
Well, that was stupid. Because he didn't know how to answer it. He
Okay,
said,
again, though, if this is Mr. Mullis's statement that you're using, correct, not this witness's?
Yes.
All right. So we'd still have a hearsay problem then, it sounds like.
I do think it could also fall under the residual hearsay exception.
And just for purposes of the record, there has been no notice of residual hearsay exception being intended to be used at this trial.
So at this point, I'm not thinking that this would be admissible.
Okay, I can move on, Your Honor, and
All right.
ask a final question. Ms. White, have you continued to support your brother throughout his legal proceedings?
Yes.
No further questions.
bye, Carla.
Okay. Ms. White, you may step down for now.
Your Honor, I think I can keep this very brief if that's acceptable.
Absolutely, certainly. You may go ahead with your cross.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I guess good afternoon now, Ms. White.
Good afternoon.
It's just we're all clear, you are Todd's sister, right?
Yes.
And it's fair to say you love your brother.
Yes.
You care very deeply about him,
Yes.
and that you did everything you could in your power to assist him with his defense.
To keep communications between him and the lawyers and just to keep the ball rolling. Yes.
And you still believe in his innocence and want to see him be successful in this action. Is that fair?
He is innocent.
You were asked a couple questions about helping review pleadings. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Would an example of that be, so there was a bond issue, I believe. Were you asked to review specifics about how much land Todd owned, for example?
I had to give background on that. Yes.
So that would be an example of specifics you were providing to the attorneys to put into the pleadings.
Just a small portion.
You were also aware, or are you aware generally, that if an attorney talks to you, if you're not the client, that it would waive attorney-client privilege?
I was not aware of that.
Are you aware of it now, generally?
I did not know that, no. I believe Todd had permission with the attorneys or told the attorneys that they should be talking to me as well so that I could be his middleman on the outside, I guess you'd say, to help with communications and make sure that the process was functioning and moving along.
Thank you. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Any redirect?
One question, Your Honor. Ms. White, did the attorneys ever give you any information about what their strategy was going to be to pass on to the family or to Mr. Mullis?
Never.
No further questions.
Any recross?
Record, we would release Ms. White from our subpoena as well. And thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now you may step down, Ms. White.
All right, thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and take our lunch break at this time. I think council, based on our earlier discussion this morning, Ms. White may be our last in-person witness. Is that correct? At least from the applicant's side?
Yes, Your Honor, that's my understanding.
Okay. I know that we have several witnesses that will be presented through their deposition testimony or by stipulation or other agreement. And the state may need an opportunity to confer before there's any final plan as far as presentation of in-person testimony. I don't know, counsel, were you in a position to commit to that at this time?
Yes, Your Honor, I can commit. As the court and both parties know, we have been attempting to ask our questions during cross-examination line matters, so we will have no additional witnesses to call at this time, just the depositions and the evidence that has been presented.
Okay. So I guess more for the benefit of those who are here observing, there would not be any additional in-person testimony. The remaining matters that need to be addressed between the parties and the court would consist of arguments regarding some remaining evidentiary issues, and then I guess discussions and clarifications regarding the agreements regarding the remaining witnesses that we have to talk about. I know that council is continuing to work on some agreements as far as how that testimony would come in specifically for the court's consideration. So we'll certainly pick up with that after lunch. And then once we've concluded that, I'll provide both parties with an opportunity for some limited oral closing argument. And both parties will then also have an opportunity to submit brief written legal briefs to the court to identify any legal authority that they believe would be particularly helpful. So we'll discuss deadlines for that as well when we come back this afternoon. I anticipate that our arguments and our discussion regarding the evidentiary issue is that both parties have up to 15 minutes for any oral closing argument that they wish this afternoon. I'll also provide the applicant an additional 5 minutes for a rebuttal closing since it is the applicant's burden. So we'll plan on concluding with that at the very end of everything else that we need to do this afternoon. Anything of a housekeeping nature that we should address then before we break for lunch on behalf of the applicant?
Nothing, Your Honor.
Anything on behalf of the state?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, let's plan on picking back up then at 1:30. All right, I'll see you back here then. Thank you.
Hey, Smurf. you guys hear Spike? I put the microphone down. He doesn't like the microphone. He backed away from it. So I don't know what you guys want to do. We got an hour. I would say let's break, but Smurf just got here. You guys want to take a break or what? We can play. We can try to play. Ooh, there's another game on the Jackbox games. I don't know if that one will work better or worse though. Let me see if I can remember how to do it. And of course, it has to update Steam. Like it doesn't every time I stupid game. Spike, what do you want? Oh, he disappeared. Now I know how to get him to leave me alone. The mic. Show him the mic. Really, Steam? You have to update every time I open you? Stupid, stupid game engine. Why have you been up for so long? Okay, well, we'll take a break then. Because I need to at least get started on doing my taxes. It's not hard because I'm on disability, so my taxes don't count. We don't have investments or anything like that, so it's just super easy to do. At least get started on them. So, oh, I gotta go find the thing that I still have to go through the motions though. So I gotta go find my thing that Social Security sends me. You know, technically, I don't think I even have to do that, but I always do anyways, just in case. Cause okay, all right. So she said one. So oh, that's right. YouTube fixes it to whatever your time zone is. So I will just make the stream and see you guys back whenever, whatever your time zone is. So I'll see what happened. Oh, now the game now makes sense. It crashed before I even got a chance to say goodbye. Judy, did you hear him? Judy, you know you're still really delayed. We gotta get somebody to fix you. I don't know why you're so delayed all the time. You gotta figure out what's going on. Okay, bye guys. 2:30, 1:30 Central. See you then.